And our program is scheduled to begin now. My name is Edna Kanguya-Ziambo from the SADC Parliamentary Forum. I'm a committee clerk. Before we begin, allow me to state a few housekeeping issues. I hope I'm audible. Can I get some feedback just to know that I'm audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you very much.
Very clear, yes.
Thank you. For our participants who may not be very conversant with our Zoom platform, kindly note that SADC PF has got 3 official languages, which is English, French, and Portuguese. To access the language of your choice, kindly go to the bottom of your screen. There's an interpretation icon. When you click there, you'll be able to see the 3 official languages and select the language of your choice. We kindly request that our participants mute their microphones if you do not have a floor to avoid interrupting the speaker. With your permission, we'll be able to take some photographs during the event, which we'll subsequently use in our articles. Our dear participants, we kindly request that you, as much as possible, use the chat box on the platform for any questions, points of clarification, or any other challenges that you may incur during the program. Having said that, I will now allow my colleague from AFRODAD to invite the Executive Director of AFRODAD to give his remarks. Thank you. Mr. Theory, can take it up.
Okay, thank you very much, Edna. I'm sure we have shared the program. So without wasting much of our time, I will call upon the Executive Director of AFRODAD, Mr. Jason Brangaza, to give his open remarks and maybe an introduction, because he's just joined AFRODAD, I think end of last year. So Jason, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Thierry, and thank you very much, Edna. First of all, I want to just say a big thank you to both Edna and Thierry for making this happen. It's been several weeks and months of conversations to actually make this event a reality. And so thank you both for shepherding both the SADC Parliamentary Forum and AFRODAD together to this wonderful moment. Honorable members of Parliament, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for honoring our invitation to have this first session on special drawing rights, a possible financing option for Africa out of this COVID-19 pandemic. The purpose of this event is to bring together civil society actors, members of parliament, government officials, and general public to understand the issues around the options to support the continent out of the current debt crisis, and what kind of homegrown solutions and homegrown options that governments, members of parliament, and citizens can advocate for, both nationally, continentally, and globally. We are amidst a debt crisis that has been accelerated and exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we are very humbled and honored to be having this first session with the SADC Parliamentary Forum. It kicks off a series of webinars that we will be having across the continent to galvanize different positions and ideas from the continent as we take these voices up to the global level and advocate for strong negotiations, fair and equitable allocation of these special drawing rights in order to facilitate and enable our continent to come out of the current debt crisis that we are facing. So AFRODAD, just by way of introduction, stands for the African Forum on Debt and Development. We are a Pan-African civil society organization that was established 25 years ago to advocate for efficient, transparent, and accountable public debt usage. Our main objectives as an organization is to support civil society and members of the public to understand how governments contract, utilize, and gain returns on investments through the debt contraction that they undertake on our behalf in order to fulfill their development agendas, but specifically to ensure that also that the debt that our governments take on do not further in debt or put further pressure on our citizens through taxation. Secondly, we do work in understanding that financing for development at the national level cannot work through debt itself. We understand that there is an important role to be played by other financial instruments, specifically tax revenue mobilization. And it is through this mechanism that we believe that tax revenue mobilization is a critical source of finance, but is complemented by other finance instruments such as debt, such as foreign direct investment, and so on. But we do believe that there should be a level of transparency, a level of accountability and governance, especially when it comes to creating the environment for loan contraction, creating the environment for foreign direct investment, to ensure that our continent is able to generate and maximize the tax revenue potential from all these other financial instruments, including the debt instruments that our governments issue. So we have been doing this for the past 25 years. And of course, we have had a level of success with our advocacy with members of parliament, with governments at both the national, regional, continental, and global levels. The most significant coming when we successfully joined a global coalition asking for debt cancellation in the early 2000s through the Jubilee movement. Many of our countries in the SADC region and across the continent have been beneficiaries of this debt cancellation that took place in the early 2000s through the highly indebted poor country initiative, also known as HEPIC, and the multilateral debt relief initiative, also known as the MDRI. However, since then, there has been a bit of a lull in holding our governments accountable and enhancing the transparency agenda around debt and loan contraction. And over the past 10 to 15 years, as our countries have grown and developed, we have become susceptible in accessing non-traditional forms of finance. And this has led to a growing appetite and a growing risk taking by our governments to borrow from a very diverse range of sources away from our traditional lenders, bilateral lenders. This has meant we've engaged with non-traditional lenders, particularly commercial lenders and private creditors, whose terms and conditions are not necessarily as favorable as our bilateral partners or those from our international financial institutions. And as a result of that, over time, the terms and conditions have continued to be extremely high risk and quite preventative in terms of repayments. And even though the credit has come very easily, the terms and conditions have really tied the hands of our governments when it comes to repayments, in terms of either very high interest rates or very harsh penalties in terms of not being able to pay. And we're witnessing this today currently in the current situation where we are in the midst of a debt crisis that has been made worse by the global pandemic. Excuse me. And as a result of that, we are witnessing a moment in time where many of our governments are needing to take and make requests for debt relief, because the global pandemic has led to a reduction and contraction of economic activity, and this has directly impacted tax revenues. So as we gather here today, one of the things we are discussing is the issue of how can we use the different instruments and leverage the different policy processes available to us in order to secure some form of extended debt relief, debt restructuring, and eventually a debt cancellation, given the manner in which some of these debts have been accrued, but also in terms of how some of our creditors have behaved in lending to some of our governments in ways that are not in keeping with high levels of transparency, high levels of governance and accountability, and therefore putting our governments and our country and citizens at a high risk of indebtedness and loss of income, livelihoods, and having to pay very high taxes when it comes to debt repayments. To illustrate this with an example, here in Kenya, where I'm currently based, we have seen, for example, the price of fuel in the last 2 months go up by the equivalent of 22 shillings, which is roughly 22 cents, making it slightly higher than $1. In this current times when things are very difficult and challenging for industries, for businesses, for people moving around, an increase in the price of petrol is likely to dampen and impact any potential economic recovery in the immediate to short term. So just to illustrate this with an example of how the current indebtedness situation is also forcing our governments to make very difficult choices, but also choices that are impacting citizens who are also losing out on incomes due to the pandemic. So this session today is really to engage with the honorable members from the SADC Parliamentary Forum and analyze and critically think about this issue of special drawing rights. And I know my colleagues will take us through the details of this. And what is important with special drawing rights, and this in the simplest terms, is a type of currency that is used by the International Monetary Fund to harmonize how much in dollar terms different countries who are members to the International Monetary Fund can qualify. And usually these are determined by what they call capital votes, which means how much capital you put into the IMF, and that determines how much of these special drawing rights can be allocated to you. So in our conversation today, one of the things we will be critically looking at is when the IMF decides to make this allocation or this issuance of their special currency, we should also be looking at a fair and equitable allocation system, because we all know that at the IMF, the voting rights are quite skewed or biased towards the wealthier countries. And therefore, if there is then an allocation, it is likely that our continent is going to be, slightly behind the line when it comes to the allocation at the country level. So also, as we consider advocating for the issuance of the special drawing rights, we must also be very keen and active to advocate for an equitable allocation, given the special circumstances under which we are seeking this issuance of the new special drawing rights. So without much further ado, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests, I would like to welcome you to the first of 5 sessions on special drawing rights, a potential and financing option out of the current global pandemic for Africa. I will now hand it back to Thierry, who will take us through the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason. I'd like to say that you're supposed to hand back to Theo. You're going to Theophilus. I was supposed to be here for the moderation, but for the technical issues I had earlier. So thank you so much, Jason, for your word of welcome, for your opening remarks in this event. And I'll get back to Edna if the Secretary General is already available to make an opening remark for this event. Edna?
Thank you very much, Phil. Our Secretary General had a technical glitch earlier on. She should have made the remarks earlier. Let me just check if she's ready now. Madam SG, are you there?
Yes, I'm trying to log in. Good morning and thank you. I had a power, I don't know whether it is load shedding or what they call it. So honorable members of parliament, chairperson of the TIFI committee, and other chairpersons of the SADC Parliamentary Forum Regional Standing Committees, the Executive Director of the African Forum and Network on Debt and Development, AFRODAD, esteemed resource persons, staff from the national parliaments, staff of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Bon dia, bonjour, good morning, and welcome to this webinar on the IMF Special Drawing Rights and Public Debt, a very important subject which the SADC Parliamentary Forum is currently engaged in with regards to debt cancellation in the African region. We are grateful that you could find time from your respective schedules to join us on this activity this morning. This engagement has been jointly convened, as you've already heard, by the SADC Parliamentary Forum and our long-standing partner, AFRODAD. The webinar is, among others, aimed at enhancing or increasing the technical understanding among members of parliament and participants on special drawing rights and how they can assist economic recovery, given prior economic challenges and the effects of COVID-19. Honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, during the meeting convened by the Economic Commission for Africa and the International Monetary Fund on the 5th of February 2021, African ministers of finance were unanimous in their call for additional liquidity at about 500 billion in special drawing rights and more concessional resources and an extension in the debt service suspension initiative, among others, given the prolonged nature of the COVID-19 epidemic. Similarly, honorable members, during the 48th Plenary Assembly session of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, a motion was moved and unanimously adopted, exhorting the regional body to support an initiative by honorable speakers and heads of African national parliaments to call for total cancellation of the continent's foreign debt. This is because many African countries are heavily indebted to industrialized countries and multinational bodies like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Honorable members, today we again join in the discussion on the subject of public debt relief mechanisms amidst COVID-19 pandemic recovery efforts and special drawing rights as option for economic recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable members, the frequency of discussing the subject of public debt at various public forums reveals the magnitude of the debt burden in Africa in general, and in the SADC region in particular. Honorable members, in the likely event that special drawing rights are issued by the International Monetary Fund, your oversight role is of great importance, particularly in holding the executive accountable in the use of these resources, including calling for transparency in the disbursement and utilization of these resources. Honorable members, as I conclude, I trust that parliamentarians, as leaders in their respective countries, and all our participants will take advantage of this opportunity to learn more, to interrogate about public debt and its effects on our economies and special drawing rights, and the importance of their issuance. With these few remarks, I welcome you to this engagement and wish you a fruitful deliberation. I expect to see another motion at the upcoming plenary assembly buttressing this progress and what needs to be done by our countries. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Secretary General, for your word of welcome. And I take two things from your word, which is the fact that this webinar serves as a learning opportunity for African civil society and people in government to understand the subject of special drawing rights, and also take the fact that you point to the need for Africans to put hands on deck to face this opportunity of getting special drawing rights, which will really serve as as one of the main resources that Africans need to deal not only with the effects of COVID-19, but also the rising debts in the continent. So without taking much of our time, we will be going into the next item, and it will be...
Sorry for interrupting, Theo. Before we go into the next item, I see a hand from Honorable Ruth Mendes. Maybe she can take the floor now.
Oh, okay. Hello, Honorable.
Honorable Ruth Mendes, you're muted. You may kindly... Okay.
Yeah, we don't have the interpretation. The Portuguese on Portuguese language.
Okay. The
Host,
Honorable says interpretation.
Could you kindly advise on interpretation?
Good morning, Honorable. Did you click on interpretation and choosing Portuguese? Because we have interpretation.
I didn't find it.
Okay. Just maximize your screen, Honorable. At the bottom of the screen, there's something that says interpretation.
Yes, but I don't find
Consegue achar, senhor deputada,
room
o
for
ícone
interpretation.
senhor deputada?
Sim.
Não consegue achar o ícone?
Não consigo achar o ícone. Eu vou ligar para os técnicos aqui da Assembleia. Diz a eles que é para continuarem, então.
Eu vou ligar agora.
Avisa só eles.
Okay. Thank you, Ronaldo. It's sorted.
Theo, you may go ahead.
Okay, is the Honorable good now?
Yes.
Yes, I think she's fine.
Okay, thank you, Honorable. It's one of those things you always have to face when you get online. It's part of the challenges and the learning process.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Yes.
Okay, now we're going to the next item, which will be a presentation on understanding SADC public debt, sustainability challenges, and the current debt relief initiative limitations in amidst the COVID-19 pandemic recovery efforts. And this presentation will be done by AFRODAD Senior Policy Analyst on Debt, Mr. Thierry Mutazo. Mr. Thierry Vangani Mutazo. We call him Thierry. That's our short form of calling Mr. Thierry Vangani Mutazo. Thierry, if you are ready.
Bom dia, meu colega. Tudo bem?
Hello,
Yes.
Thierry.
Yes, Theo, thank you very much.
Estou com um problema. A deputada Ruth Mendes está participando de um
Introduction.
seminário da SADC na sala dela e ela não consegue.
Okay, thank you very much, Theo. Maybe Edna, can you enable me to share my presentation?
Okay, Ronald?
It should be okay now.
Okay, thanks. You may proceed, Thierry.
Okay. All right.
Sim.
Okay, 1 minute.
Yes.
Oh, I'm having a bit of a challenge here. 1 minute. Yes, are you able to see it now? Hello,
Yes,
Edna?
Thierry, I think your screen is visible. We can see your screen now, Thierry. You may go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Theo. All right, so as our moderator just said, I will try to give a brief understanding of the scenarios with regards to SADC public debt as of today in the context of COVID-19 and the economic recovery efforts we have seen being put in place by various SADC member countries. I think this will help us in understanding the next presentation, which is a technical presentation, where we will get to understand what SDRs are all about and why, as AFRODAD and as parliamentarians, are we calling for their issuance by the IMF. So this is just a brief on the SADC debt. I have this outline in terms of presentation where I will give just an overview of the SADC situation with regards to debt and also some of the international community COVID-19 financial response packages and also the local one, that is the national economic stimulus packages we have seen in the various SADC countries, and maybe a critique of the current debt relief initiative limitation, especially the new ones that have come on board. We have heard about the debt service suspension initiative and the G20 common framework, and also the fears we still have maybe from civil society perspective going forward, and some of the proposal which then we will get into the SDR discussion. So I think like the rest of the African continent, the SADC region, even before COVID, was already facing big challenges with regards to its debts, which has been rising. I think since 2012, we have been seeing countries graduating from being called a low risk of debt distress to a moderate, then a moderate to a high risk, from a high risk to a debt distress. And this has been worrying, I think, since 2012. And there are various reasons why this rise has been going on like that. I think some of the reasons in the slides I will be sharing. But the COVID-19 itself, especially the economic impacts, have actually worsened the debt sustainability situation of most of our SADC countries. I think we have seen that the COVID-19 have affected a lot of key macroeconomic variables and global value chains, which have significant implications for debt sustainability across the globe, actually. And a number of developing countries across the globe have been affected by that. But also we have seen that there have been some fiscal pressures as a result of health expenditures at the national level, even at the regional level. We have seen countries coming up with economic stimulus packages, and this has put a lot of countries at risk of debt vulnerabilities because of the need to raise enough resources to put into some of these expenditures. But generally, the average public debt for SADC, what we have observed from our end is that it has been increasing, or it has increased from 39.2%, that is as of 2011, to 55% in 2019, and this is from the IMF. And the pace of public debt accumulation has been higher for countries like Angola, Mozambique, Zambia, Swaziland, Namibia, and South Africa, which had exceeded the average of 30%. But we have also seen that the debts have somehow been decreasing in countries like Botswana, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Zimbabwe due to the decline. I mean, this is generally the decline with regard to debt to GDP ratios because of various reasons. But in 2020, by 2020, within the SADC region, 3 countries were in high risk of debt distress, and this is Zambia, Angola, and Malawi. And 2 countries are already in debt distress, and this is Zimbabwe and Mozambique. However, there are countries within SADC that are called market access countries, and these are South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, Mauritius, Eswatini, and Swaziland, and Seychelles, and their debts are being considered to be sustainable. But coming from a civil society perspective, we have seen that a lot of these countries are spending more on debt servicing than on other social development sectors. So it's a big worry for us, although their debts are being considered to be sustainable. This is just a figure that is showing the pace of public debt accumulation, as I said, and the 3 countries, Angola, we have there, Mozambique, Zambia. I think the rise in terms of the debt has been higher than other countries. And the main drivers we have observed are mainly because of new borrowings. I think quite a number of countries from the region have gone on the international capital markets, issuing Eurobonds, and Zambia is one country. One of the reasons also has been the budget deficits. For them to finance the deficit, a lot of countries have been going out and borrowing, especially during this COVID context. We've also seen exchange rate depreciation. We've also seen the rise in interest rates and a lot of debt creating inflows. I think this factor is the one that is very important for our discussion today, because we believe if the SDRs within the IMF are issued, they are not a debt creating inflow per se. So that's why from a civil society perspective, we are really pushing for their issuance. One of the reasons also that has pushed the accumulation of debts within a number of SADC countries in commodity price fluctuation on the international market. A lot of our countries depends on export of these commodities, especially the raw material and minerals. And we've seen a low foreign direct investment. And all these have been some of the reasons cited as the reason for debt accumulation or the rise in debts that we have seen in a lot of SADC countries. However, within the context of COVID-19, I think as of 2020, we have seen the international community coming to the rescue of a lot of developing countries with regard to the challenges, especially on debt. So the IMF so far have lent close to $1 trillion to its membership through the emergent financing facilities, and a lot of SADC countries have accessed those facilities so far. We have Comoros, we have DRC, we have Madagascar, Malawi, Mozambique, Tanzania, and Seychelles. They've accessed millions of dollars. I think some of the figures are there. The World Bank, again, have come to the rescue of a lot of developing countries, not only within SADC, but generally in Africa and other developing countries. They've committed close to US 160 billion. And we have seen that countries that benefited from the World Bank COVID-19 fast track facility from the region, that is from SADC, they included the DRC, with a 47 million, Eswatini 6, Lesotho 7.5 million, and Malawi 37 million. And we have also seen that all these countries have spent or are spending some of these resources on health and social protection, food and water. So this is very important. Again, we have seen homegrown economic stimulus packages by quite a number of SADC countries as a response to the challenges presented by COVID-19. And these somehow have been important packages to promote economic recovery. We have seen monetary policy measures, especially from central banks, that have responded by cutting interest rates and providing more liquidity and even loans to the private sectors. The size of fiscal support have been low and varies considerably across countries, on the upper end being Seychelles, that is with regard to SADC countries, that have come up with an economic package of like 5% and Namibia 4.2% of GDP. And some of the smallest are from Swaziland. And a lot of this information we can get it from the IMF Policy Response to COVID-19 tracker that really shows what is happening with regards to member countries' initiatives. But however, from a civil society perspective, we feel that these levels are far much below the stimulus packages of at least 5% of GDP required by most countries. And also they are below the levels witnessed in advanced economies of around 8 to 10% of GDP. We have seen Germany, the US, and the other OECD countries spending huge sums of resources or funds to kickstart the economy after being affected by COVID-19 lockdowns. But within the context of the SADC, countries have come up with smaller stimulus packages, and it really shows the challenges in terms of raising enough resources to fight COVID-19 and its economic impacts. So we are in this context then raising the need for additional resources for SADC countries so that they can fight COVID-19 and finance their economic recovery efforts. Again, we have seen in the last year or so the international community, especially the creditors, bringing on board debt relief issues, especially with regard to restructuring. And we have seen this as a big issue now being discussed at the international level, especially within the IMF, the G20, and the China as a lender or a creditor. So last year, the G20, in collaboration with the IMF and the World Bank, and China included, they came up with the Debt Service Suspension Initiative, which is basically an initiative aimed at suspending debt repayments for almost 73 low-income countries globally. So the initiative is up to June 2021 as of now. Although from our side as CSOs, we have been pushing it to be for 2 years up to next year, June 2022. This initiative has been welcomed and endorsed by quite a number of creditors. I think countries are equally saving a number of, millions of dollars to put to the fight of COVID-19. The majority of SADC countries, yes, they are beneficiaries of DSSI, and they are saving millions of US dollars from this initiative. However, as CSOs, we have noted quite a number of limitations with regards, for example, to the initiative, the DSSI, because currently it lacks the participation of private creditors. And there's a danger that the money that is freed from the other official creditors, the IMF and the G20, might be used to repay private debts and not to fund the response to the COVID-19 crisis. I think this is a very important aspect of our work currently as CSOs, where we are really at the global
Hello, Thierry?
Yes.
Okay, you are back.
Okay. Yeah, it should be the network. Okay. So I was on the point of some of the concern or the limitation of the current debt relief initiative we have seen on board. For example, the DSSI, where currently private creditors are not participating, and it's a concern for us. And a lot of other countries, especially middle income countries, have been left out of this initiative. despite the fact that they also have to fight COVID-19 impacts. So that's one. Again, we are calling for the extension of the grants that will take us to June 22 instead of the current June 21 timelines that are there. The debt service suspension does not address the debt crisis. It simply just postpones the problem. So I think from an African side perspective, we really need a debt resolution mechanism. The legality, the legitimacy, and sustainability of the debts. For SG from SADC have raised some of these issues that there are calls currently for a really lasting debt resolution mechanism to be put in place. So in November 2020, as I said, the G20 came up with a common framework for restructuring of debts, again, for low-income countries in the world. And currently, we have 3 African countries that have applied to be considered for the framework. And from the SADC region, we have Zambia, Chad, and Ethiopia. And a number of African countries are actually lining up seeking debt relief under this framework. The mechanism is too short-term and do not address the core faults in the global financial architecture, nor the flawed debt finance mega infrastructure approach to the development. I think currently we from the civil society sector, we are not happy with the mechanisms that are in place because they are flawed. They do not address adequately our concern. So we will continue to urge for proper mechanisms to be put in place. This is because we still have fears of debt sustainability. There is a danger, there are so many risks that countries in Africa, and especially within the SADC, might really fall into debt distress, joining the other 2 countries we talked about from the region, that's Zimbabwe and Mozambique. The reason why we are so afraid that the debt challenges will not go away is because of the loan and debt management and social protection frameworks in the region. They still fall short. They fall short of fostering transparency, accountability, and inclusiveness. And these are key requisites for proper debt management. And again, we have seen an increased and rapid borrowing during the COVID-19, which somehow have resulted in the suspension of good debt governance standard practices. Because it's a crisis, it was a pandemic, countries might have or have had suspended good debt governance practices, especially parliamentary approvals. We have seen countries borrowing without regarding parliamentary approvals, and it's a very serious issue with regards to transparency and accountability. We have also seen that the SADC Parliamentary Forum, parliaments and national parliaments within SADC have been part of the call to pressure the IMF to issue out SDRs. I would not go into the details of that, but my colleague Marriott will give us a detailed presentation on what all these SDRs are all about. But we feel from a civil society perspective that we need African parliamentarians to voice the need for IMF to issue special drawing rights, either through pushing our own national governments, through the African Union, through the finance ministers, so that the SDRs can be issued, because the challenges of financing recovery is really a tall order for a number of our countries. I think let me stop there, having given this short of a context to the next presentation, which is basically on the issue in detail today of the special drawings. Theo?
Thank you, Thierry, for the rich presentation. on the current debt sustainability situation in the SADC region. And if I could just mention some of the few things that you pointed out in your presentation, you pointed out the fact that debts within the SADC region are on the rise, which is a common trend in the African continent, and is driven by many other debt-creating instruments. And this includes the rising interest, on current debts. And you mentioned stimulus packages that have been put in place by the African countries, which we all acknowledge is not enough. And the question of the potential of this, packages to drive economic recovery is a key concern. And how to use SDRs is also very important. You raised that, and it's also a very important concern at the moment. And how to invest the funds, and are some of the things to consider moving on. And you also pointed that we have seen other mechanisms in place, like the DSSI and the G20 Common Framework, which are also out to deal with issues of debt restructuring, and besides debt restructuring, also to deal with the adverse effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, which you acknowledge as the entire civil society, that these measures are still not enough, especially in dealing with the, with the structure of the international financial architecture. So these are key concerns. Moving on are some of the things that I picked from your presentation. And as we move forward, we're going to the next item, which is on unpacking, special drawing rights. And the most important question for us at the moment, as the Honorable said in our opening remarks, is that this is a learning opportunity for us. And in the next presentation, we will want to know what SDRs are and how they are being allocated, and how has SDR issuance since 2009 been done, the politics around SDR, and the question of whether SDR have the potential to, to worsen the current debt situation in the African continent. And we also want to address how the issuance of SDRs can help in the current debt crisis, and if they can be helpful in the vaccine procurement process and delivery. So to handle this subject is our expert on this subject for the morning will be Chaira Mariotti. Chaira Mariotti is a senior policy and advocacy officer in development finance with AFRODAD. AFRODAD is a sister organization to AFRODAD. And Chaira is a development economist who joined AFRODAD in October 2020 as a senior policy and advocacy officer. Like I said, she leads the work on international financial institutions' undue influence on developing countries, and the policy and fiscal space, and on reforms of global economic governance. She previously was inequality policy manager for Oxfam before joining AFRODAD, where she led policy and global advocacy work on inequality. So she has also been a researcher with the Overseas Development Institute, focusing on policy solutions to chronic poverty and combined field qualitative and quantitative research methods in her work. So Mariotti holds a PhD in economics from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, and she has also taught in political economy in British universities. She is Italian, but has been living in the United Kingdom, in London to be specific, for the past 18 years. So she will be the one to unpack the subject of special drawing right for us this morning. So Chiara, if you are on, you're welcome.
Yes, I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning,
Good
Chiara.
morning, everyone from Brussels.
Yeah.
Thanks so much
Good
for.
morning from Yaoundé. I am joining you from Yaoundé, and you're welcome.
Thanks so much for the introduction, and good morning to colleagues and honorable MPs. It's an honor to be with you this morning. I'm going to share my screen in a moment, and I'll put my camera off also because I don't have great internet facilities. So I hope everything is going to go smooth, but in case there is a PowerPoint presentation that can be sent to you. So let me take my video off for a moment and share my screen. As Theo introduced, my role with you today is to try to shed some light on what special drawing rights are and how they can be used and what we can expect in the following weeks and months. But before I start, let me check that you can see my presentation and hear me fine.
Yes, Chair, we can hear you very well. I think the rest of the audience can hear you.
Okay, great. So I will start. I will probably speak for about half an hour. Let's see how it goes, and then I will stay around for questions. I might not be able to stay with you for the entire seminar because I have other meetings later this morning. Anyway, what are special drawing rights? They are a reserve asset that was created by the IMF in 1969 with the explicit objective to supplement countries' official reserves. They have a balance of payment problem. Their value is based on a basket of 5 currencies, so it fluctuates a bit. Something important to keep in mind, because it's relevant for how they can be used, they cannot be held by private. They can only be held by countries or by the IMF or other designated institutions, but they cannot be traded on financial markets like any other currency. Now, each allocation of SDRs provide country with a fixed amount of SDR, which is based on their quota to the IMF, with no conditionality on how they should be used. It's liquidity that is provided to countries with no conditionality on its use. So it's costless in a sense.
Chiara.
Yeah.
Okay, just before you continue, might be you would have you shared your screen. We can see your screen from this end. I don't know if you tried sharing it.
You can't see it?
No, we can see your screen from this end.
Sorry, yes, also that's my fault because I started and I didn't, okay. My apologies. I share screen. What
That's
about
great.
now?
That's great. We can see your screen now. Thank you.
Okay. You see it fine, right?
Yeah, it displays well. Thank you.
Okay, so I was saying that they are costless in a sense, and they come with no conditionalities, but there are constraints which are due to the fact that they are not a currency and they are tied to the way the IMF operates. And I'm going to clarify this in the next slides. So let's see if I can go to the next slide. So how they are allocated, they are distributed in proportion to the members' quotas to the IMF. So roughly, so far, this has meant that 60% go to the global north, 40% to developing economies. Now, one thing that I want to mention is that, yes, this is terribly unfair. The problem is that to change this, the rules and the agreements of the IMF needs to change, which is something that is going to take a very long time to get to. And so while it should definitely be an objective and something that we seek to achieve, to reform the IMF towards more equitable ways of working, this is unlikely to happen for the allocation that we are discussing now, that hopefully will happen in the very short term. Now, another thing that you need to keep in mind is that SDRs are an asset, and as such, they earn an interest rate. So if a country holds more SDRs than above its allocated quota, so if a country acquires SDRs, they receive an interest rate. If they exchange the SDRs for hard currency and go below their quota, they will have to pay an interest rate. And this again has consequences in terms of what we can expect countries to do in donating and reallocating their SDRs, because it means that they have to pay interest rate on that. This interest rate is very, very low, well below the current interest rate on financial markets. So there is still a huge advantage with them, but it is a cost in a sense. Now, so far, there have been 3 general allocations. The last one was in 2009, in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, and was in the range of 250 billion. In terms of the process to get to a new allocation, it's as follows. The managing director makes a proposal to the executive board. The proposal is discussed, and if there is support by the executive board, then it needs to go to the board of governors that must approve it with a majority of 85%. Now, clearly, the power dynamics within the executive board and the board of governors are the one that we know, with the USA basically having veto power on any decisions because they have the largest quota. And this is why it's a decision, it's a process that it's very hard to get to, because it requires 85% majority in the board within the IMF. Something else that, let me go to the next slide. So how can special drawing rights be used? When they are allocated, they are listed as reserves and are under the management of the central bank. Now, 2 things can happen. The central bank keeps SDR as reserves, and this has a positive impact because it means that a country's savings increase. This makes their credit worthiness increase, which means that countries can borrow more and at better terms on international markets. So this already on its own has positive effect. A country can also decide to exchange their SDRs in hard currency, so in dollars, in euros, in yens, you name it, and use it for import or for budgetary financing, for fiscal uses, so to pay for public investment. It goes into a country's budget and it's used to increase fiscal space. Now, the way in which SDRs can be converted into hard currency, it's not automatic. It means that there must be another country that is willing to acquire more SDRs. However, what we have seen until now is that there are a lot SDRs transactions. They have been increasing over time. And in general, it's developing countries that give away their SDRs because they are using hard currency exactly for imports or to create fiscal space, to pay for their budget, whereas developed countries tend to hold them, acquire them to increase their reserves. Now, so to go back and to stress a couple of points which are relevant for this discussion. Why would they be useful? New issuance of special drawing rights would be extremely helpful to help developing countries face the COVID-19 crisis, because as we have been saying, it would be a means to create liquidity for countries with no particular cost and no particular conditionalities. It would make possible for countries to increase their spending and therefore to invest in whatever they decide to invest to, because there are no conditionalities. So each country would be able to choose where to use this increased liquidity. Obviously, it would be a huge opportunity to invest in health system, in education system, in the creation of new jobs, in the energy transition. So that the very unique way of SDRs is this lack of conditionality with which they come. Now, how much? Because this is actually the critical issues that we are facing at the moment. How much we want this new issuance of special drawing rights to be like. Last year in March, UNCTAD called for an issuance of 1 trillion. The ECA's Executive Secretary, Parasongwe, called for 500 billion. Within the G20, there seems to be support for an issuance of around 500 billion. However, AFRODAD, EURODAD, and a large number of other organizations are calling for an issuance that is much larger than that, in the range of $3 trillion, for the reasons that I'm going to show you. This is what an issuance of 500 billion would look like in terms of how much money African countries would get. Apologies, I can see that my graph is a bit mixed up, but I can tell you that if this issuance were to be in the range of 500 billion, developing countries would get about 30% of it, so around 154 billion. Sub-Saharan Africa would get about 11%, so about 16 billion. Southern African countries would get around 8.7 billion. This is, of course, a lot of money and a lot of useful money. However, given the situation of the debt crisis that we are facing. In practice, this would mean that all of this money would be used to repay creditors. Let me show you another graph. As you can see, these are estimates of the external public debt service faced by different regions in the world compared to their projected SDRs that they would receive with a 500 billion issuance. You see that a special SDR allocation for Africa would be smaller than their external public debt service. So we can hypothesize that this liquidity created would automatically be used to repay creditors, leaving no additional resources to invest in post-COVID-19 recovery, to invest in health, to invest in education, to invest in job. So again, this would be helpful. It would be, we should not deny as such, but it would be too small to address the problem and the scale of the problem that we are facing. With a 3 trillion allocation, so way bigger, developing countries would get around $100 billion, more or less. Sub-Saharan Africa would get 100 billion, and Southern African countries would get around 52 billion. Now, this would be around double the amount of the external public debt service, meaning that there would be additional resources left over to invest in public investment, in public services. So this is why civil societies all around the world are pushing for an allocation that is as large as possible. Now, what is going on? What is politically feasible? What we can expect? As you know, the discussion on SDRs has been going on for 1 year. The proposal has been going on since March last year. Nothing has happened, largely because of opposition by the Trump administration, which was particularly opposing the idea of giving additional liquidity to countries such as Iran, Venezuela, China. So mostly for geopolitical reasons, there was opposition. The Trump administration has said explicitly that it's in favor of a new issuance. So that problem has resolved. And there is now a lot of signals from the G20 that there is an overall support for a new issuance. However, this has not been decided yet, so there is still the risk that it doesn't happen, and that's why it's still extremely important to continue push and advocate for it, because even if everyone is saying, yes, okay, we are in favor, you never know until the end. The G20 is now under the Italian presidency, which has been talking about an allocation of 500 billion, and so has Janet Yellen at the US Treasury. Something else that is going on is that there is a big constraint to what can happen that comes from the US politics. And this is what is going on. According to the US law, Treasury can approve a new allocation of SDRs if this is below within the US quotas to the IMF. So, and this is the case if the allocation is of 500 billion. So in that case, there is no need to go through Congress to approve the measure. However, for a larger allocation that goes above the US quota to the IMF, there is need of Congress approval. And we know that there is opposition in the Senate by the Republicans at the moment. So this is the major constraint at the moment to go for a large allocation. It's not a constraint that can be removed, but it cannot be removed in the short term, let's say in the next 3 months. So that is one problem. One thing to take into account, however, is that the IMF is in favor of a large allocation. They are going to make their own study to assess what are the current global liquidity needs and make a case for an SDR's allocation. And it's likely that their estimate will be larger than 500 billion. So the IMF on its own is not necessarily tied to a specific figure. And again, there is the space to push them and make the case that there is need of a lot of money. And one last thing that it's useful to keep in mind, and that in a sense gives us optimism for a large allocation, is that, as you maybe know, the IMF works in 5-year cycle. According to the rules, the managing director can make the case for a new SDR's allocation at the beginning of each cycle, and also under exceptional circumstances, like for instance during a pandemic. Now, the discussion that is going on at the moment is falling under the 11th period, which is ending this year. So it's not impossible that we have a situation in which a new issuance is agreed this year, so under the 11th period, and then a new proposal is made next year under the 12th period, which means that even if we have 500 billion this year, we could have a new one, possibly a larger one, in the next couple of years. And the reason why I'm insisting on it, it's because I really think that from a strategic point of view, this is the moment to demonstrate that additional liquidity is needed, and for countries to demonstrate and to show how they would use this additional liquidity, how they put it to use to foster a COVID-19 recovery, to invest in vaccines, to invest in a just transition. But this is on the shoulders of countries to show that this liquidity is needed, and they would use this money for these uses. One final thing actually two final things that I'm going to tell you. One are the next steps in terms of the IMF. So the IMF staff has brought the discussion of a new issuance officially to the executive board at the moment. So they are discussing. More official discussions, especially around the amount, will happen at the spring meetings with other finance ministers and the G20. Then the process will be formalized in June. So a proposal will be brought to the executive board in June. If the executive board approves, it goes to the board of governors in July, and the final decision is taken in August. So an allocation could be made as soon as August, if things go smoothly, although, as I said, we cannot take that for granted. The last thing I wanted to mention, because I've seen that there were discussion on this also in the chat, is on the reallocation of special drawing rights. Now, regardless of the amount of the new allocation, be it 500 billion, be it 3 trillion, the majority will go to developed countries. So they will have this additional liquidity, which they don't necessarily need. And a lot of discussion is going on how this money can be used to help developing countries to address the COVID-19 crisis and finance a just transition. Now, the thing that you need to take into account when you hear these discussions is that there are constraints to what can happen to these SDRs that are in developed countries' central banks. As I said, first of all, they are an asset. They are not currency, so they cannot be used to fund specific projects. They can only be exchanged between countries or with the IMF. Any use and any reallocation is unconditional and voluntary. This is true for both developing countries and developed countries. And even developed countries have rules and legislation that limit what they can do with these SDRs. So changing them would mean changing legislations in developed countries. So again, a pretty long-term process. What is the most likely thing to happen? The IMF will recommend each country to allocate their excess special drawing rights to the Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust, which then the IMF will use to make additional loans to developing countries. Now, this is not an extremely desirable option. It's the more likely option. It's not very desirable because it means that this liquidity would be redistributed through loans, through IMF loans with conditionalities, which is not ideal. But it is in the short term the most likely and the most feasible option. Another option that we are advocating for is that SDRs go to the CCRT. I always forget the acronyms. Sorry. The Catastrophe Containment and Relief Trust that provides debt relief to countries. So that's a better options because it will support debt relief or effort of the IMF, and this would be a direct benefit. But again, there are some constraints on the side of developed countries. Some of them cannot be do it by law. There are other proposals being made. I'm not going to go in details at the moment because I personally think that the most important issue for us and for you at the moment is making the allocation happen, making the case, demonstrating why it needs to be as large as possible. So show how this money would be used and insist with this so that we have the conditions to have a second allocation if this one is not as large as we would like it to be. I think I will stop for the moment because I think I've overloaded you with information and I'm happy to take questions if you have some. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chera, for your rich presentation and on the special drawing rights. And we note that you said it's a special reserve asset with no conditionalities attached, which means countries can spend the resources as per their development priorities, and that it is tied to IMF operations, despite the fact that it's not a currency per se. So you did indicate that any changes with the IMF, with the special drawing right, we also need IMF reforms, which is something that we are unlikely to see in the very short term. And overall, you confirm that SDRs are, is politically driven monetary resource, and which has only been sporadically issued. And that there is a case to, there is an opportunity to make a case for a large allocation of SDRs. I think this is a key concern for African civil society, especially AFRODAT, to make a case for a larger allocation of SDRs. And I would like, Chaira, for you to hold on, to stay on for a while after another presentation so that we can get into the plenary, because we have a series of questions that have been addressed to you. So we'll be grateful if you can stay on for a while and attend to these questions. So now we will be moving to the next item, which is another presentation on SDRs from Honorable Debele. He's a member of parliament, lawyer and member of parliament from Zimbabwe. And he will be making a presentation on, I would also like to add that Honorable is a member of parliament besides being a member of parliament for Zimbabwe, he is also chairperson of the SADC PF Standing Committee on Trade, Industry, Finance, and Investment. So his presentation this morning will focus on the IMF special drawing rights as a sustainable option for financing the fight against COVID-19 pandemic and recovery. And in fact, this is under this theme. It's under the theme, but he will be narrowing this down to the Zimbabwean example. He will start from a specific presentation, the general presentations to the specific case regarding the Zimbabwe situation. So, Honorable, if you're available, you're welcome.
Thank you so much. Can I go ahead?
Yes, Honorable, you can go ahead. You are on.
Thank you so much. I'll just share my video for a while so that people are able to marry face with voice, but I will switch it off as we go. Hello, everyone. All protocol observed. I will ask Thierry to share.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Honorable. Are you on?
Yes, I'm on. Can you hear me?
I can hear you from this end.
All right. I wanted to share my video for a while so that people are able to marry face with voice, but let me just go ahead. I will request Thierry to share my presentation because I'm on a tiny mobile device.
Yes, Edna, please, can you assist Honorable to share his presentation, please?
I've shared my screen, Honorable Ndebele's presentation. I'm not sure if you're able to see it on the screen.
Yeah, absolutely, it's clear. Thank you very much. This is going to be in the form of a conversation because I realize that some honorable members and ladies and gentlemen in attendance here maybe more experienced in matters of SDRs more than I am. But I'm going to speak to this meeting mainly as a backbencher. I'm sure that allows me or clothes me with the privilege of stepping on toes without intention, but I don't mean to anywhere. This is how my conversation is structured. I'm going to answer the question, is there political backing for special drawing rights? And also I'm going to look at benefits of SDRs, and I will address the question of challenges that are likely to be faced by the government of Zimbabwe when the SDRs are dispersed. Where I have said government of Zimbabwe, it's simple because this is an area where I can speak with authority, but colleague members of parliament may replace Zimbabwe with their own countries where and whenever it fits. And I will also address myself to the question, does the Parliament of Zimbabwe play an active oversight role over dispersed SDRs? And of course, what can be done to improve parliamentary oversight over SDRs? I should have actually begun with a disclaimer that I speak as a backbencher and not necessarily chair of the TIFI committee at SADC. In answering the question, is there political backing in Zimbabwe for SDRs, I took the approach that it's a yes and no, but as you would have it, the eyes have it at the end of the day. I must start by underlining the fact that indeed, by and large, MPs are in support of the issuance of the special drawing rights to fight COVID-19 and to bolster economic recovery. I think this is more applicable to us in Zimbabwe and possibly our Mozambican brothers who are already in debt distress like us. The general feeling amongst most parliamentarians is that fiscal gaps, it is difficult to fill in fiscal gaps using commercial funds or private funds, because usually these come with unpopular conditionalities. Members of parliament will remember the 1980s phenomenon of structural adjustment that came with retrenchment of employees, reduced social development expenditure, and of course, more recently, there is this specter of Chinese loans that are mineral backed. So there is also a consideration by those that are against SDRs that are against commercial lenders or private funding, to the effect that is Zimbabwe, our country, not mortgaging her minerals, for instance, to the Chinese, and to that effect, they conclude that we possibly have a resource case. And those who are for SDRs also argue that when government borrows locally, it makes it difficult for the private sector to access cheap funds. In those arguments is also embedded the question, why does debt continue to be a recurrent matter in the discourse of Africa's development? And some of the view that has already been alluded to by other speakers, SDRs are nothing new. They've been around since 1969. And then the other argument is we cannot continue to be recipients of aid 5 decades after independence. I think we have been through the aid debate before. I urge honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, to read Dambisa Moyo's book. It's a fantastic read, actually, on dead aid, where the Zambian economist steers into post-war development policy in Africa today, and unflinchingly confronts one of the greatest myths of our time, that billions of dollars in aid sent from wealthy countries to developing nations has helped to reduce poverty and increase debt. There is also this argument from the other side of the aisle in the House that the IMF should not be responsible for financing strategies to combat COVID-19. Rather, the United Nations should be doing this. The IMF was created for microeconomic stability and balance of payment support. So WHO and the UN ought to be playing their part like they did with HIV and Ebola. But do remember, honorable members, what I say, I'm only looking into the other voices, but by and large, members of parliament are in support of further issuance of SDRs. The advantages have been visited by our experts. Among other things, they have no conditions attached to them. But for me, as a politician, the gist of the matter is that SDRs are used by the IMF to make emergency loans and are used by developing nations to shore up their currency reserves without the need to borrow at high interest rates or run current account surpluses at the detriment of economic growth. This couldn't come at a better time than now, when we are in the woods due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the debt conundrum that was already facing us before the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm going to quickly move on to what I view as the challenges that Zimbabwe might face. The first one is that we might create a dependency syndrome where our government doesn't think outside the box, to think that the few resources that we have can still be used prudently. And furthermore, I have always felt from the Zimbabwean context that there is always a tussle between the central bank and the Ministry of Finance. For instance, in the era of what we called our government of national unity, we had a tussle between the then Minister of Finance, Advocate BT, and the Reserve Bank governor. At the time, the governor needed SDRs to fund extra fiscal activities, and the minister was of a different view. And then there is the question of rent-seeking behavior or corruption. All our countries in the region have had these scandals around COVID-19, the COVID gates, we have had state capture, we have had tenderpreneurs, and the feeling is, if left to their devices, political elites and cartels might abuse these funds. And then, does Parliament play an active oversight role? I know we have been cajoled or nudged or lobbied by our brothers and sisters in civil society not to sit on our laurels, but to get up and follow the money. In Zimbabwe, we have a progressive constitution that supports Parliament in its bid to monitor public expenditure. If you go to our constitution in section 299, it says Parliament must monitor and oversee expenditure by the state and all commissions and institutions and agencies of government at every level, including statutory bodies, government-controlled entities, provincial and metropolitan councils and local authorities, in order to ensure that all revenue is accounted for, all expenditure has been properly incurred, and any limits and conditions on appropriations have been observed. So, in the event that Parliament sleeps on duty, so to speak, it will become a problem, because all these resources flowing from the SDRs will be abused. But what I want to point out is our constitution is progressive enough and gives ample room for Parliament to play its oversight role on the executive. But there is one thing that may curtail the role of Parliament, particularly for those in the ruling party. Section 129K that we have there speaks to the issue of parliamentary whipping. If you allow me a minute, I will read it out. I quote, if the member has ceased to belong to the political party of which he or she was a member when elected to Parliament, and the political party concerned by written notice to the Speaker or the President of the Senate, as the case may be, has declared that the member has ceased to belong to it, the member is removed from parliamentary service. So it's that easy for your sponsoring political party to remove you from parliamentary service. In the event that in the House, you then argue with the Minister of Finance on how SDRs are deployed, you are then likely to be conceived as no longer belonging to the sponsoring political party because your views are in direct conflict with the actions of the funding political party. So there is the elephant in the room. Members of parliament in Zimbabwe and elsewhere may be aware of what they are supposed to do in the interests of following the money and protecting resources. But in fear of being recalled, in fear of political victimization, they may fail in that duty to stand firmly on behalf of their constituency. Now, I will quickly move on to recommendations. I notice a number of parliaments have these laws that allow them to play their oversight role effectively. I will zero in on Zimbabwe. Parliament should ensure that SDR resources are channeled towards their intended use. And because these funds will be released to central banks, it is incumbent upon Parliament to engage central banks to monitor and track the use of SDRs. Otherwise, the money can be diverted to other unintended uses. Parliament must also hold the power of the purse over SDRs just the way it oversees the executive and the budget process. Parliament should conduct public hearings and stakeholder consultations on the disbursement of SDRs to make sure that the targeted sectors are reached. Then, of course, there is the appeal on public accounts or budget committees to do a thorough value for money audit. And the UN, as earlier alluded to, together with WHO, should play a more active role in financing initiatives to combat COVID-19 that will leave additional resources to take care of budgetary financing, helping pay public debt, and address other balance of payment demands. The SDR facility must also be presented to Parliament and debated so that everyone is aware of what is on the term sheet. These SDRs must be treated and scrutinized like any other loan agreement. And it's important for us as members of Parliament to also keep urging our governments to be innovative and come up with domestic means to finance efforts to combat COVID-19. We have the resources, and in some cases, we have ample resources that go begging. With that, I would like to thank you.
Thank you, Honorable, for your wonderful presentation. And you did underline that it is not a new tool. SDRs is not a new tool, and that in the context of Zimbabwe, there is some positive political backing which we still need to determine, and that the SDR has a positive role in that it doesn't significantly increase, debts as they attract very low interest rates. and has no adverse effects on the local economy. You also presented some of the challenges which are creating, a continuous propagation of the dependency syndrome, and also, the contestation on what to do with SDR resources, and the fact that the possibility of diverting SDR funds by officials for other public or non-public use is always another concern. And you made several recommendations which fall within what AFRODAD has called the African Borrowing Charter, which recommends strict fiscal discipline, and also responsible investment with whatever financial resources that we have. I think AFRODAD will have the opportunity to share with us the borrowing charter, and I think the recommendations that you made fall largely within the framework of that document. And you also pointed out to the need for government to be innovative, in dealing with issues of development finance. So thank you so much for your wonderful intervention, Honorable. And at this moment, we shall be moving into our plenary session. Hello, Edna.
Thank
Hello,
you.
Edna.
Thank you. I'm here.
Maybe you have some few housekeeping rules regarding the plenary session.
Thank you, Theo. We are now going to open the plenary. Honorable members and our dear participants, this session is open to all participants, including MPs and civil societies and all participants that may need to make a contribution. I can already see some questions in the chat box. Honorable members and our dear participants, you can indicate your questions in the chat box, or alternatively raise your hand on the Zoom platform. From our chat box, there's a question from Luis Kizito, who's asking, is there a way that these new excess special drawing rights in rich countries could be used to help poorer countries that will be liquidity and budget constrained even after they receive their SDRs? Mr. Luis Kizito, would you like to elaborate more to your questions or that is enough?
Hello.
You may go ahead. You have the floor. You may introduce yourself.
All right. I am not from any SADC nation. I am from Uganda, but I got interested in this because our population hasn't yet got this. But my name is Luis Kizito. I am a lawyer. I work for a fintech company, or a tech company, startup company generally. I'm about 27 years old. But now let me just illustrate my questions. And very briefly, most of my questions go to the doctor, professor. I didn't get the name quite well, but this is my question, and I want to be as brief as possible. The Lord should help me. He said that there's a point where if they transfer these SDR allocations to a trust, they can be actually turned into an interest condition bearing loan. I wanted her to illustrate more on that. And then I have three concerns. That's the first. Second, the reallocation of SDRs alone may not be enough. That is what I think. So if at all we are going to convince African nations are to convince the rich nations to reallocate their excess reserves, in order for them to keep their reserve character and not for them not to be a cost, an interest-bearing cost on the rich nations that are going to reallocate, wouldn't they need to be given as turned into something like grants or loans? And then final, I don't want to take so much time. I think Africans, we should reevaluate our position in this global financial system. I have been following this SDR talk since 2018, but now it has picked up so much. I'm happy because I even had written an article in one of our nation dailies just to tell the population about it. Now our parliament is not even talking about it anyway. I don't even think any East African countries talking about SDR allocations yet. But what I have to say is that there is no reason why we cannot design our financial system that actually caters to our interests, because the global system we are in is actually keeping us captive. There is no reason why we have so much gold here. There's no reason why our banks cannot be allowed to hold gold as a reserve asset. Gold has no counterparty risk. I just don't know why it is flowing out of this continent. I don't know why a country like Mali, which has deposits and deposits of gold, gets its gold to France, and as a country, it has no gold, and then it has to borrow. I think, you see, we have in this geopolitical concept, and as I conclude, geopolitics as it is, our place as a continent, we need to first, the elite of this continent need to sit down, reevaluate our place, because the more we continue with, okay, yeah, allocation is there in the short term, we can chase that. But in the long run, in the next 50 years, we should have a game plan. We should be more forward thinking, because honestly, I don't see why we are kept in such a system. We have very many currencies that have no value, and yet money, by then, as I concluded once said so much, money is more of a medium of exchange than the value for which they are, ever since we left the gold standard. People agree to what money is, not the value for which things are. So as I conclude, I don't know if the professor recorded my two questions, very key, but also we should think about our place in the geopolitical financial system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kizito, for your concerns. I don't know. I'll leave it open to both Honorable and Dr. Chera to take on these issues. The key concern about Africans. Hello. Hello. Okay, it was like I had the voice. I think I'll leave it open to Honorable and to Tiara and to any other member of to any other person or participant to intervene on this. Kizito's concern is whether Africans cannot set up its own financial system, an African system based on backed by gold, and not depend on the global system that creates what Honorable had already indicated, continuous continuous dependence on the international financial system, which unfortunately is slow to serve Africa's development needs. I don't know anyone to take this up. I think I'll ask Honorable to go first, if you don't mind, Honorable.
Thank you. Let me just hasten to say, because we are in an emergency and we need to get out of the woods as soon as possible. We certainly need issuance of SDRs. But I agree with the honorable member that going forward, it is ideal that we consider becoming innovative enough to come up with a homegrown or Africa-grown solution to our financing problems. It's more important now than ever before. For instance, if you look at the fact that we are just not trading enough amongst ourselves, that could be the starting point, so that we gather resources that we could then go on to lend to each other within the continent. And apart from doing so, we are possibly the richest continent in the whole wide world. We have several minerals that with appropriate prudence, we should be falling back on. That's where I will leave it at.
Thank you, Honorable. We have Dr. Chera who wants to go because he wants to get into another meeting. I don't know, Dr. Chera, do you have any comment on the question from Kisito?
I can stay another half an hour, so we can take a few interventions and then I can come back.
Okay.
Okay.
Then there is another question on what I'll actually do at this point, ladies and gentlemen, is to ask for us to come up with our questions as briefly as possible, directed to Chara. Please, if you can just raise your hand, and then you will be allowed to put your question through to Chara, please.
Theo, I already see two hands. There's a hand from Honorable Dr. Msokotwane, as well as Sergio Vaz. Honorable Msokotwane, you may kindly take the floor.
Yeah, okay.
Hello, Honorable Msokotwane, are you there? Okay, Mr. Sergio Vaz, you can
yes,
go
I'm
ahead.
there. I'm there. So,
okay, Honorable Msokotwane.
Sérgio Vaz, posso falar?
Thank you, Honorable. You are on. We are listening to you.
Ok. Eu queria dizer o seguinte. Tenho uma questão rápida dirigida à doutora Chiara. Este mecanismo de direito especial de saque é um mecanismo que é um patrimônio para auxiliar as economias, sobretudo as economias dos países em desenvolvimento em tempos de crise. Como o momento é agora a crise da Covid-19. E foi explicado que a administração Trump, a administração americana anterior, opôs-se ao uso desse mecanismo. E parece que agora a nova administração, a administração Biden, está a favor e parece que apoia este mecanismo. Será que isto, na verdade, vai funcionar? E como disse o interveniente anterior, vamos continuar a depender sempre dos outros países, tendo em conta que os Estados Unidos da América, o Congresso americano aprovou um pacote de recuperação da economia, de apoio social às pessoas e de combate ao Covid, um pacote bilionário. Não precisou de autorização do FMI, nem do Banco Mundial, nem de ninguém. Foi simplesmente o Congresso americano. A União Europeia também criou o seu mecanismo que designa-se bazuca, se eu não tiver erro, bazuca ou uma coisa assim, que é para, no mesmo sentido, combater a Covid e recuperar as economias dos países membros da União Europeia. Não recorreu a nenhum mecanismo, nem FMI, nem nada. Será que nós vamos continuar sempre dependentes para termos... Nós temos o problema da Covid-19 que afeta todo mundo e afeta muito mais as nossas economias que já são frágeis. E para acedermos a auxílio, a fundos, temos que depender da vontade de países terceiros. Vamos continuar sempre assim? Esse mecanismo eficaz vai funcionar? Muito obrigado. Esta é a minha questão que eu queria levantar.
Thank you, Honorable. Chara, do you have any response? Was there a translation?
Yeah, I do need translation. Sorry, I didn't put the interpretation on. If someone can sum up the question for me.
Yes. Edna, is there anyone who will assist us to sum up the question for Jara, please?
Honorable Jara's question in summary was that should we continue to depend on IMF because he sees that the Trump administration had opposed to the issuance of special drawing rights, and now the Biden administration is showing signs or is positive about issuing these special drawing rights. Should we now depend on IMF for these special drawing rights? And he also goes on to reiterate what Honorable Ndebele said about not fully depending on IMF or external financing, but establishing our own solutions to our financing challenges. I hope I got that right, Honorable.
Thank you.
Thank you for that submission. Jara?
Yeah, thanks. I can come back now or take a few more questions.
Okay, there are some more questions.
Okay, there's one more. There's one more for Honorable from Honorable Stombeko Msokotwane. Maybe our resource person may take Honorable Sergio's question together with Honorable Dr. Msokotwane's question. Honorable Msokotwane, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Mine is rather of a comment rather than a question. So is that allowed?
Yes, please, you may go ahead.
Okay. I think the way to understand this SDR is to see it as international money, as opposed to money that is controlled by one country, like the dollar for America, Rand for South Africa, Kwacha for Zambia, and so forth. Now, for me, from the outset, I want to say that I support the call for increasing SDRs, okay, because there's an economic case for doing so. Now, back to the issue of seeing the SDR as a currency, but not one controlled by one country, but by the international community. The question then is, when do you increase the amount of currency, in this particular case, the SDR, and when don't you do it? The answer is that in the case of the national state, that is the prerogative of the central bank. If there's too little money in the economy, you find that the economy slows down because people cannot transact, there's not enough money. And I think the practical experience of this is when Zimbabwe was using the US dollar, and therefore at times people were failing to sell cows, failing to sell maize because there's not enough US dollar circulating around. So money in circulation is little. If money in circulation is too little, the economy slows down, okay? Now, if it's too much, again, Zimbabwe is a good example because they were using their own money, which they literally printed, and hence the trillions of inflation that we witnessed. So the trick or the art of managing the amount of currency circulating around is to avoid economic recession because there's not enough of it around, but also to avoid inflation because there's too much of it around. So the question now is, if we understand that this DR is an international currency, when is it enough? When is it too much? When is it too little? Bearing in mind that it can cause inflation or depression. And the answer in the case of the SDR is that for now, because the economy of the world has been disturbed, there is indeed a case for increasing the amount of international liquidity in the form of SDRs, and hence the support that I provided earlier on. But also, we need to be mindful, and this is where we Africans need to be careful. Don't expect that the amount of SDR will just be so liberal issued to solve all our problems, because it will not happen. It will cause global inflation, and no one will agree to that. So therefore, as I conclude, Mr. Chairman, I do support, but with a proviso that let's not see this creation of money as the ultimate solution to our problems. I think some people already said that certain countries like Zambia, we were already in a debt crisis even before this COVID, okay? And now because of the COVID-induced economic dislocation, we need to change. The SDR is part of the solution, but the other thing that needs to be done is, how do we export more? How do we manufacture more? How do we boost our economies? Increase of liquidity is part of the solution, but it's not the only one. Economies need to be reformed so that they can produce more goods, we can produce more food, and so on and so forth. So in short, Mr. Speaker, I support, but let's not pretend that this is a problem that is caused by COVID. Let's look inwards. And I'm actually disappointed that we are speaking very little about our own problems, the own mistakes that we've made, and how we are going to correct that. We want to concentrate all our efforts in terms of what the international community can do for us. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you. Or rather, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Honorable. I think this question will be directed to Chera as well. Chera, the Honorable just spoke, and he said that can the SDRs really solve African problems? How flexible can that system be to solve African problems? I think this already adds to the previous question from which was posed by Kisito and which was partly answered by the Honorable. And there is another question from Dr. Nyashunu. Why not allocate SDRs in relation to the need as opposed to the current formula being used? I don't know if Dr. Chara, you are available. Already think you can take these questions. And after that, we will invite Jason, the Executive Director, Jason from AFRODAD, and Mr. Thierry Mangani Mutazu to also take on the questions. Chara?
Yes, okay. So I've taken notes, and I'm going to make a few notes, which I hope overall tend to address the questions raised. And I wanted to start from the bottom, which is that, of course, a new issuance of SDRs is not a solution to all problems, definitely not to all problems faced by African countries. In terms of that, in terms of development constraints, in terms of facing a just transition, but also more on the issue itself. They are an instrument that, as they are now, reproduce the unfairness and the injustice that it's embedded in the design of the global financial architecture, and that to overcome this unfairness, what we need is a structural reform of this architecture, which is more equitable and gives more power to developing countries. This is absolutely the case, and obviously a key part of this would be a reform of the IMF. There are very rigid rules that regulate how SDRs work, because they are written in the articles of agreement that establish the IMF. And so changing those would imply reforming the IMF itself. Now, this is, of course, something that we should continue to aim for and push for. And I think that by all means, there is momentum to do that now in the middle of this crisis. And it's important that we as civil societies, that national parliaments continue to make proposals on how this should look like. But for as much as related, they are two different issues. And in a sense, the discussion on what happens in the next months or year with SDRs, I mean, it makes sense to look at how it is now and what can happen, because indeed it is an opportunity to do things that otherwise would not be possible. And let me reiterate that SDRs are not aid. They were designed, someone wrote it in the chat, SDR's allocation is like central bank printing money, exactly. The whole idea initially was to make the IMF the central bank of the world. This didn't work, but SDRs are the closest thing to an international currency, a global currency that we have. And so when they are created and distributed, is not to give aid to Africa. It's for the IMF to play its role of improving the smooth working of the global economy and creating liquidity for all. So I don't think you should look at it as something that is only for African countries or it's for the IMF to provide aid to Africa, because in this case, it's not the case. The problem is that the instrument is designed according to those unfair rules, and it's embedded in a system that it's unfair. So there are problems that come with it. But this is a global measure that will benefit all countries. And if anything, the problem is that African countries will benefit proportionally less than others. Now, the other point, which is absolutely, I mean, I totally agree, and it's really spot on. It's not a long-term sustainable solution to any problems. It's a one-off emission of liquidity, which is made possible because we are in an emergency situation due to COVID, but also because all countries in the world are facing the huge challenges that come with climate change, and we'll have to embark in an energy transition that is going to cost money everywhere. You know, doing that transition is going to be expensive, so money is needed. And if you don't want, you know, if we don't want this money to come from more loans and more debt, and then SDRs are an exceptional opportunity to have that liquidity to face that specific challenge. It will not solve structural fiscal deficit problems. Each country will have to address those regardless of these issues. That is absolutely the case. And then another thing there was a question on the PRGT, the Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust. So you know that the IMF has this, you know, it has several funds and several channels of distributing money, but one is the PRGT that is designed to make conditional loans to the lowest income countries, but it's loans, and it generally comes with some form of conditionalities. And then there is the CCRT, that is the Catastrophe Containment Relief Trust, that is used to make debt relief, so cancel debt. Now, at the moment, additional SDR, some developed countries have been transferring their excess SDR or donating their excess SDR to the PRGT, to the Poverty Reduction Growth Trust, that the IMF has then used to make loans to developing countries. And this is the most likely way through which countries in the future, rich countries in the future, will be donating.
Hello, Sarah. Yeah, you're breaking.
Yeah, my apologies. It's my internet that's not that great. How is? Let me take my camera off. Let's see if it's better. Okay, so I was saying that there are two instruments for the IMF, the PRGT to make loans and the Catastrophe Containment Relief Trust, through which debt relief is provided. Rich countries, what they are likely to do is to transfer the SDR to the IMF, which then will use them for the PRGT, so to make loans. What we would like, what would be much better, is for countries, rich countries, to channel their excess SDRs to the Catastrophe Containment and Relief Trust, which is the instrument through which the IMF makes debt relief, so cancel off all the debt. But there are legislative constraints in many countries for this to happen. So it can happen, but there needs to be a lot of influencing and advocacy at the national level with governments to push for this. No, and the last thing was on making the distribution more equitable. So as we were saying, by design, SDRs are located on the grounds of countries' quotas. So unless we redefine IMF quotas, which absolutely should be done because they make no sense at the moment. But until that happens, there is no automatic way, or even not particularly feasible way in the short term, to change that, how that allocation looks like. So then we go back to the discussion on reallocation, which is what we were saying until now, which is a big topic that is going to be on the table for the next months and possibly years, but that it's going to require a lot of thinking and negotiation and pushing to understand what exactly is feasible and not. The last thing, whether this additional liquidity is used in a transparent and accountable way, it will depend on each country and the decisions of each government and parliament. And obviously, I come from civil society, and then for me, the best way to ensure that is that civil society and public dialogue happens at all stages of deciding how that money is being used and spent. And I'll stop, and I hope this was made some clarity. Let's see.
Thank you, Chair, for the answers. Before we take another set of questions, I think I'll let Mr. Thierry Mutazu and Jason Braganza take on the concerns that were raised. Also, maybe they have some contributions to make, especially regarding whether Africans cannot set an independent financial system, and why we think, whether we think the SDR allocation is in relation to the need, as opposed to, why not allocate SDRs in relation to the needs, rather as opposed to the current system? Thierry and Jason.
Okay, maybe Jason, you can go first.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, honorable members, for your very active participation and questions during this session. And very cognizant that Kiara has got to leave in about 5 minutes. I want to just pick up on a few things that she has mentioned, but also the sentiments of the questions that have been asked on the chat, but also through the various honorable members who've spoken. I think there's one thing, there are two things that we need to be very cognizant of in terms of the challenges that we are facing as a continent and as a region. On the first hand, it's the debt crisis that has been accelerated by the pandemic, which has led to an immediate economic contraction and immediate pressures on the fiscal side of things. And this means that whilst we still have our debt repayment obligations, our revenues being mobilized over the last 18 or so months has been heavily constrained and restricted by the global pandemic. And therefore, this means that we need some immediate measures in order to, first of all, safeguard tax revenues so that they can be redirected into jumpstarting our economies. And this is where the conversation around the debt relief, debt restructuring, and eventual debt cancellation comes in. And within this context, there are all these different instruments and different options that are available that civil society organizations, that governments are advocating for, including the issuance of special drawing rights from the International Monetary Fund. The second one is the medium to long-term ambitions of how Africa takes its place within the global financial, economic, and commerce architecture. The global pandemic has really, with great strength, emphasized the important role that we as a continent play in the global system of trade, commerce, business, and finance. Our commodities, our exports in terms of raw materials are an integral part of the industrial processes in creating finished goods. Therefore, what we need to start to be thinking about is how do we implement the aspirations, for example, in Agenda 2063, that moves us up the value chain across each of these different productive sectors. And how do we do that with the fiscal space that's going to be created in the immediate term through our debt relief efforts and our debt restructuring efforts and debt cancellation? So that's the first. That's the first element that we need to start thinking about the immediate and then the medium, and then the questions around Africa's own financial architecture. The blueprints are already there within Agenda 2063. They are draft protocols that describe and define what an African financial architecture would look like and could look like, including the role of our own African Monetary Fund. And I think that move towards our own fiscal and self-determination and sovereignty is a broader political question that the COVID-19 pandemic is presenting us with an opportunity to critically look at how we position ourselves as a continent in making sure that our dependency on the IFIs and the global north more generally is reduced, and that we start aspiring and meeting the self-determination under Agenda 2063. So I think these are the two important factors in how we consider the conversation around the SDRs. It is an immediate liquidity issue that it is trying to address, but also in the medium to long term, it is giving us an opportunity to challenge the status quo that has over many decades kept the continent low down the value chain, but also low down in terms of setting the rules that govern global finance, global trade, and global commerce. So I just want to stop there and then very cognizant also of the time. Back to you, Theo.
Thank you, Jason, for the elaborate answer. And Thierry, you have anything to add before we take the next set of questions?
Yeah, maybe just to reiterate some of the important points that came from Marriott's presentation and also intervention from the honorable members of parliament. I think what came out very clearly is, in my view, the need to understand the technical aspects around SDRs, of which I think Marriott did very well. But also the case that we need to make a case for the SDR issuance. Why do we need those the issuance of the SDRs? And I think what Jason said is that the continent and even the region is in a crisis, it's in an emergence because of COVID-19. And we are really seeing the gaps in terms of the financial resources available for our countries to respond to these crises. It's not enough. But also to highlight the fact that Honorable Ndebele raised the need for any SDR facility, or do we need them? Do countries need them? I think that debate needs to be brought to Parliament as we monitor the progress up to August, which is a period Marriott said a decision might be there on whether they will be issued or not. I think national debates on that SDRs is very important because it will then bring in those players, for example, the central bank and the ministry, in terms of what exactly are they going to use those resources for, and transparency and accountability are key. I think the political backing we are getting from the intervention of the honorable MPs is very encouraging because it is through them that we get transparency and accountability issues on the board. Yeah, I think countries are opting. It's a sovereignty issue in my case, where countries decide whether to take the SDRs or not. Because what we are also seeing currently with the debt relief initiatives that I spoke earlier on, for example, the debt service suspension initiative and the G20 framework, some countries are opting out of those. So it's up to member countries to, for example, to take up their SDRs or not, or it remains with their IMF. So these are some of the key issues I think going forward we need to reflect on them and maybe emphasize more as we discuss the issue at the national level. Leo?
Thank you, Thierry. Thank you for your answers. And before I go ahead to accept some of the hands that are raised in the participant list, there is a very straight pointing question here directed to Honorable Anes. It's directed to Honorable Anele Ndebele, and it's coming from Mavic Kumelo. And his question is, to what extent can Zimbabwe ensure that funds from these SDRs are spent exclusively for the items they were procured for? And what monitoring mechanisms does Zimbabwe have in place to ensure that such funds are spent for the purpose they were obtained for? Honorable, do you have any quick answer to this? I think Honorable is not there. Thierry, you want to comment on this question?
Yes, I think from a civil society perspective, I think we still have challenges within the context of Zimbabwe. I think my colleague might be aware of what the reports from the Auditor General are saying in terms of findings. There are quite still some challenges with regards to public finance management in terms of the usage, in terms of transparency, in terms of accountability. So yes, there are challenges, and I think maybe the authorities as we speak might be addressing some of those challenges. Yeah, let me leave it there.
Thank you, Thierry.
Sorry, Sorry, I spoke to a muted gadget.
Oh, sorry, Honorable. You can take the floor, please.
My response is similar to Thierry's, that there are challenges in terms of the public finance management. But when you look at the supreme law of the land itself, it empowers Parliament to get off its laurels and really take the executive to task. But the handicap might be that maybe we have a too polarized parliament, where if you are in the ruling party, for example, you believe turning a blind eye to wrong things amounts to patriotism, whereas that is not the case. I think I will, for now, leave it at that. But the law as given or provided by the people is good enough to allow for Parliament to play its oversight role to its full extent.
Okay, thank you, Honorable. I don't know if Shara is still on the line, and I think this question also is open to everyone, including Jason, Thierry, and this Honorable, and every other participant. This is the question: what is the ultimate bait of the SDRs? Is it good from goodwill, or is it part of a strategy for economic slavery? This question is from one of our honorables, Honorable Tepang Tita Musena from Lesotho. Anyone to take on this question? Chara, if you are there, please, can you take the lead? And
yes, I'm here, but I was just going to, sorry, I got distracted a moment, so I missed this last question, but I've seen that there was another one on the 2009 allocation, which I can quickly address. Is there are other things specific for me which I can take now, and then I'm afraid I'll have to go to prepare for the next meeting.
Okay, Chara, I think since you're about to leave for your next meeting, I think you'll just take on a few concerns that you have for now, and then you take your leave. Thank you for being available. So.
Okay. No, so yeah. I'll just because I've seen that there was in the chat a question about how it worked in the 2009 general allocation that, as I mentioned, happened after the global financial crisis. And it happened exactly in the process that I described. The managing director made a proposal to the executive board. It was approved. And it happened, it was in the range of 250 billion. Now, the reason why it happened, it's because there was a broad political support for it. And the reason why it was broad political support, it's because it was a measure that benefited all countries, including rich countries, which at the time were in the middle of the financial crisis and that were really happy to receive additional reserves. that helped address the balance of payment crisis. Remember that all countries were in turmoil and that were facing a crisis at the time. And special drawing rights are useful to create fiscal space, but are also useful to address balance of payment needs when a country is in shortage of foreign reserves. So basically it happened because there was political support across the board at a global level, which reiterates the point that I was making earlier, that this is a measure that is global and universal, and it's not. You don't think of it as aid. And Theo, is there anything else that I should address?
Yes, there was this question from Honorable Tepang. He said, what is the ultimate bait of the SDR? Is it from goodwill or economic slavery? And he went ahead to say, granted that Africa needs assistance and it should find ways of financing itself, but can this support be considered a necessity considering the unrelated effects? For example, that of to solve and to unrelated, please let me, but before you come to this one, let's take on the first one, please. Let me just give you the first one, the one that is related to the ultimate bait of the SDRs. I will get back with the second one.
I mean, I think it's neither one or the other. I don't think of, from where I sit and how I look at global economic governance, it's neither, it doesn't work because of goodwill, and it doesn't work because of, in this case, at least, because of economic slavery. It's just an attempt of doing multilateralism and addressing a collective problem in a collective way, with all the limits that come from the fact that we are in an unfair system. And this is undeniable. And so even measures, even interventions that are designed to be a collective multilateral response with a component of international solidarity will also have downsides, will also create some injustice. But this is the system in which we are. And I can't think of any feasible solution to address all the problems that collectively we face that doesn't have one of these elements in itself, that is only goodwill and has no negative consequences. But you know, this is also a little bit of a philosophical question, and I'm only giving you my personal opinion and the way in which I look at things and the job I do.
Thank you, Chera. Just before you go, the last one, I think Honorable Tepang will have to take the floor to pose the second question. It was in the chat box, but it doesn't really read clearly. So, Honorable, do you want to come in and to clarify your question to Chera before she leaves?
Oh yes, thank you so much, and thank you for that first response. The second one really, it's just me thinking that Africa needs assistance, and it should find ways of financing itself. That is true, but can we consider this support, the SDR mechanism? Can it be considered a necessity, considering the unrelated effects to COVID, of the West, such as the climate change issues, for example, which have an equal economic or a comparable economic drain? That's just me thinking, if much as Africa, we need to be able to finance ourselves and take care of our problems, but there are some problems that are brought to Africa by the West. And yes, I know IMF is a collective institution, but we know, at least myself, that it's driven majorly from the West. So if there's this kind of mechanism that's been put in place, and considering the other adverse effects that we've had to encounter as Africa from the West, then wouldn't this also be, much as it's not related, but be considered as something useful, considering the fact that we've also had some harsh repercussions from the West? That's basically what I'm asking. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chera.
Yes. So this is the options that countries have available that has the least adverse effects, because ODA, we want ODA and we want it to increase, but as you have pointed out, ODA is a transfer from the north to the south. It creates power relations, it creates dependency. And something that is done specifically in developing countries. So again, it replicates a certain types of dynamic that we don't particularly like. The alternative is to borrow money. So you increase debt. And that has all the problems that we have been discussing until now. There is also an option of increasing, of leveraging private finance, so increasing private investment, in particular foreign direct investment in African countries, which has its own problems and challenges, and in particular, it cannot, regardless of where you stand on the role of private finance and foreign direct investment in the development of your country, FDI are not exactly the best tool to invest in public health, public education, social protection, some types of green investment, creation of jobs, making sure that public workers receive a decent wage, all these things for which you need public expenditure, not private expenditure. So the way that I see this is a way of providing liquidity that doesn't have all of these other troubles. The limit is that it's a one-off thing. So it's not a long, problems will remain. And unless this money, the real challenge would be to invest this money to address the structural problems that countries face, and to address, yes, the emergency, but also to invest in all the things that would enable a just transition. So that the real thing would be how this money is used in a productive, effective, and also just way. And so it's not wasted, pass me the term.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chera. Thank you for the response. Thank you for taking the questions. Okay, and now we will go to the chat to take to the participant, to the floor to take the hands. There are two hands up, that of Mavi Komalo and that of Situmbeko Musuko Twani. So we start with Situ Mbeko. Please, the floor is yours, Honorable. You want to say something?
Is it fine if I say my goodbyes?
Hello? Hello, Chera?
Yeah, sorry, I was just saying that if it's okay if I say goodbye.
Okay.
I mean, unless there is something burning, but I have another call in 10 minutes.
Okay, in 10 minutes. All right. So you'll still be with us for the next 10 minutes?
No, I have a call in 10 minutes. I really need to go in 1 minute. But people can also send me emails by email. I'm really happy.
Okay, maybe you can just leave your email on the Dropbox, on the chat box, so that we can share it with the audience to follow up with you with questions.
Absolutely, and the presentation will be available as well.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Chara, for making our time this morning to talk to us, to make this presentation, and we appreciate your inputs. We appreciate the presentation and the questions you have taken thus far. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I hope it was of help.
Yeah. So, Honorable Situ Mbeko, do you want to come in now? Hello? Hello, if Honorable is not coming on, can Honorable Mavic Komalo?
Oh, thank you very
Can
much.
Can you come in, please?
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Yes, indeed, Mavic Komalo from Swatini. Chairperson, thank you for the wonderful presentations that I've heard this morning. But I would want to find out if, to what extent can AFRODAD make intervention. I'll give you an example. In our case in Eswatini, in September of last year, we got a loan of $110 million under the SDR. And that $110 million, we will start paying it back in June of 2023. Now, the payment period, it puts the country under pressure because we have to pay the loan in 8 quarterly installments. Now, if you start paying the loan in June 2023, you are expected to have finished paying the loan by June 2025. What does this mean? It means that each quarter you have to pay an equivalent of 204 million rands. I know that we come from the South, all of us understand the rands value. So in each quarter, you have to pay 204 million rands. I am aware because I was talking, about this matter with the Minister of Finance, that how are we going to handle this? Now we're seriously considering of introducing other source of revenues into the fiscus, which will enable the country to be able to withstand this kind of payment. Otherwise, yes, we appreciate this SDR, but the conditions are quite stringent and they are choking to small economies, particularly because we are still struggling with our own other, excess baggages, loans and all that. So in most cases, the usual loan, where you find that it gives you a grace period of about 5 years, and then you pay it over 20 years or something, that is better. But these SDR, they're a killer on our economies. So I've just given the scenario. So I'm asking, is there anyone who can intervene? Because yes, it's an emergency. Yes, they are helpful, but the pressure is very high. It's a money-making scheme. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable. Thierry, you want to take on this from Honorable Kumalo?
Yeah, thank you very much, Theo. I'm not sure I got it right. When you said you got a loan from SDRs, maybe you might need to explain a little bit in terms of details on that. I'm not sure whether he's saying they got a loan from SDRs, or is it a loan from the IMF or from somewhere else? But anyway, what is important, I think, with regard to his inputs is that the parliament or parliamentarians are always supposed to scrutinize the terms and conditions of any loan taken by their governments. And this really speaks to the debt servicing condition, the interest rates, period. I think that's where parliamentarians have to play a very critical role in terms of breaking down the terms and condition of each loan, so that before it's signed, they really know what they are getting into. Countries are getting into challenges with regards to servicing debts or loans that they contracted, and sometimes not getting into the details of the terms and conditions of those loans. So going forward, I think it's very critical that parliamentarians really scrutinize the terms and conditions before they are signed, so that we don't get into this scenario where we then start to raise questions around challenges that we might be getting into. Because as of now, a lot of our countries are having challenges servicing debts that are maturing, especially as a result of the challenges presented by COVID-19 to the economies. But I didn't actually get the source of the loan. Maybe a bit of clarity on that.
Can I clarify this? Thank you. The source of the loan is the IMF. This is part of the emergency funding that we got from the IMF. And we got an equivalent of $110 million US. Now, you know, ordinarily, you're talking about scrutinizing the loans and terms and conditions. This is what we've been doing ever since I went to Parliament 22 years ago. And we know that. But the fact of the matter is, once you have a crisis, these loans just lend in just like that. And then it's an emergency loan. It finds the country in dire straits. We need the money. But, you know, it's a case of this is what we can give you right now, and as part of the SDR, under the SDR initiative. That's what we got the loan. So all I'm saying is there any intervention that can be made? Because we know other loans that are long-term. Is there any intervention that can get put in place just so that the period of repayment is made longer than these 8 quarterly installments that I'm talking about? That is my point of concern. Thank you very much.
Yes, Thierry, I think this is a question of spreading out payment and not crowding it out within a short space of time. Do you think you have something to say? It could be one of the policy suggestions we want to consider.
Yes, I got it. But yeah, I think normally any loans from the IMF, they are supposed to be discussed with the fund. So we can raise the challenges that the countries are having currently in terms of servicing the loan. But the country, I think, can get into discussion with the IMF with regards to how best the challenges the country is having now with regard to servicing that loan can be restructured. I think the IMF is always in a position to discuss with its debtors or its membership with regards to that. But as civil society, we always raise these issues with regards to the challenges that we see happening in country, and also the impacts of maybe a country's spending more on debt servicing than it is spending in terms of investments in the social sector, education, health. Yeah, so purely technically, that's supposed to be done with the fund itself. But as CSOs, we always raise our voices against such terms and conditions that may not favor the country at the moment. Jason?
Yes, thank you, Thierry, and thank you, Honorable Khumalo, for that question. And I think you raise a fundamental point here with what is actually wrong with the current architecture when it comes to the international financial institutions engaging with governments, particularly those on the continent. Just to emphasize a little bit what Thierry has mentioned with regard to civil society actions. So there are a number of things that we have been calling for a very long time with regard to the voice of developing countries within the fund and a reorganization of how voting is done. And the moment that sort of voice battleground within the fund is won, it gives developing countries a strong opportunity to leverage on negotiations at the director level. The second thing to consider is, as AFRODAD, we have spent a lot of time investing in building the capacity of members of parliament to understand how these different processes work. And we continue to be committed to doing that. And this session is one of those interventions that we're trying to do. The third and final point I wanted to make on the terms and conditions is that it is important for us to constantly place pressure on the IFIs in the way they interact with African governments. And this is why we are calling for a reforming of the global debt architecture, because at present, even with the current debt options or debt relief packages, particularly, for example, the one that's being offered by the G20, none of the IFIs are part of this framework or part of this debt relief mechanism. And it is for exactly that reason that you have elucidated, Honorable Khumalo, is that they will ask the bilateral countries to provide the debt relief, and then they will step in to provide debt relief continued in the form of loans. And we have been saying since the onset of this crisis that African governments cannot borrow their way out of this crisis, because it is going to be an extremely painful and expensive process for us to try and attempt to borrow our way out, despite the supposed low interest rates. So it is something that AFRODAD is very much committed to in challenging, not just at the technical level, but also at the political level, in terms of where the global debt architecture is headed, the reform that it needs to institute, and the level playing field that our governments need to be able to engage when it comes to these negotiations. So I just wanted to add that to what Thierry had mentioned. And I also need to just quickly excuse myself, because I need to jump onto another call. And I will hand over to Theo, who will represent me in the closing remarks towards the end of this session. So it's just to say a big thank you to the SADC Parliamentary Forum for this wonderful partnership that we've had today. And I do hope that we can continue with our continued collaboration and partnership as we move towards campaigning and advocating for a more resilient and more Africa-friendly debt architecture. So thank you all very much. I will drop my email in the chat box in case there's any follow-ups that need to be done from us. So thank you all very much. Theo.
Thank you, Jason, for this intervention. And at this point, I'll go back to the floor. There is Honorable Anele Debele's hand. Honorable, do you want to come in? And if Honorable Situmbe Mbeko is connected, please, can you come to the floor too?
Theo, thank you very much. This particular one is directed at all my colleagues, MPs within the region, just to check on, quickly check on regional experiences. But just give me a second to thank the SADC PF Secretariat for that aptly coined theme for the 46th plenary, is it? The one where we're looking at strengthening accountability during a pandemic, the case of COVID-19. This was prophetic, and it came at the most psychological moment. Why am I saying so? All the while I used to think Parliament was an essential service, being one of the three arms of the state. Then I came to some hard lessons during the hard lockdowns, the curfews, movement restrictions. I then realized we had been closed out or restricted on the basis of a mere statutory instrument and not even a declaration of a state of emergency. So it means a whole minister just used delegated authority to come up with these rules that also virtually shut down Parliament. And it made it so difficult for members to play their essential oversight role in terms of, for instance, ensuring effective oversight on the implementation of the emergency regulations themselves, because we were under lockdown. I want to check with my fellow colleagues what they experienced in their own countries, because it came as a very hard lesson to realize that on the basis of a statutory instrument, delegated authority delegated by the House of Parliament itself, we were shut down, locked down as Parliament itself. And this put to test our role in terms of ensuring transparency during a pandemic. Became so difficult because you get a member of the executive opening an essential hospital in your area and you could not attend. And the worst would be when you are invited, you have no role. You sit there as a bystander because you've been invited, at the mercy of a member of the executive. I just want to check regional experiences. So essentially, it's a question for my colleagues.
Thank you, Honorable. Fellow colleagues from fellow honorables from the SADC PF. I don't know if any wants to come in at this point to address your key concern. Hello, honorables. I can see Honorable Mavic Komalo's hand is still up. Honorable, do you want to say something? Hello.
Sorry, sir. It's just for the last take, but yes, I had my colleague Ubam Demele from Zimbabwe. In fact, the way he spoke, it was like me talking, because we have had to undergo the same experience in Swaziland, called Eswatini, obviously. But there has been very little that we could do, because this is a situation in which we never even anticipated and what direction it will take. But we have been victims, the same way that he has been in Zim. We are worried, though, because there is a lot of talk of the phase 3. We can only hope that we will find a way of coming out of this situation. But yes, the piece of legislation that he spoke of, we have suffered the same. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable. Thank you, Honorable. I don't know if any of our honorables have something to add. Hello. Apparently, there is no other hand up on the forum. we may want to move towards our closing if there is no hand already. Okay, all right. We may want to move to a closing now, and I will give the pride of place to Honorable Ndebele to do the closing on behalf of the SG, who maybe we can't reach the SG, maybe due to technical difficulties. And Honorable Ndebele, you may want to come in at this point to do the closing on behalf of SADC PF.
Have you failed to locate our SG?
Yes, apparently the SG is not reachable at the moment, probably due to technical difficulties. So we were hoping if you are able to do the closing on behalf of the August Forum, on behalf of SADC PF.
Oh, all right. Thank you very much, Chair. Honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to do the honors by thanking you so much on behalf of our Secretary General and the staff at SADC PF. It's been an enlightening workshop or an interface. We are all grateful for your attendance. I wish you well. Thank you so much for the interface.
Thank you, Honorable. Before we go, apparently there is on our agenda we failed to include an important item, please. Just before we have to go, there is a statement we want to issue as AFRODAD and as SADC PF regarding the outcome of this forum. I don't know, Thierry, please, can you come on this? Please, I'm sorry for moving too fast. You know, young people are so acquainted to speed, and I found myself moving faster than usual. Hello, Thierry.
Yes, Theo. Is Edna, do you want to come in on this, or do we have enough time to go through the statement, or the idea was then to share it with members of parliament for their input? We have a draft that was done yesterday, and I think we can circulate it for inputs and signing. Edna?
Okay.
Thierry, I
Edna,
think
do you
you
have
can
something to add to this?
Thierry, I think you could just do a summary, then we can conclude in the background and circulate it to participants.
Okay. Yeah, it's just a one page where we are raising the need for making a case, in other ways, where we are making a case for the need for the IMF to issue out the special drawing rights, and some reasons why we are thinking this is very important, and how it will help SADC countries in particular, but also to show that there is political backing for the issue, and especially from a parliamentary perspective, given that this event has been mainly dominated.
Hello? Hello, Thierry?
The influence Hello?
Hello, Thierry. It's like we lost you
Yes,
for a while.
Yes, so the statement is just we are making a case on why we think the issuance of special drawing rights are important and indicating that
Hello, Thierry, are you able to share the statement on the screen? It's like we are losing Thierry.
in the event that they are issued.
Hello, Thierry.
Yes, I think the network is bad. My network is going up and down.
Yes, we were saying if you are able to share the one-page statement on the screen so that we can have this, we can have the other members of the SADC PF and other participants to see the statement before we get to circulate that. Are you able to do a screen share of it?
I don't think so. I think we can share it later on, maybe after via email and get inputs. Currently, no.
All right. Okay. Okay. Edna, do you have anything else to add, please, regarding the statement?
Hi, Phil. I think we will circulate the statement because it needs to be translated into our few official languages before we can officially circulate the statement.
Okay.
Otherwise, I think
right.
Thierry has done a summary of it. I think there's been enough. There's been positive outcome from this meeting, and also just a caution to take into account the fact that it's not the only option, and African nations might be mindful the effects of inflation or deflation, as the case may be, following the issuance of the special drawing rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Edna. I think we should now be moving towards the closing, and we already had a word from Honorable Debele on behalf of the Secretary General, whom we couldn't reach because of technical difficulties. And I will, at this moment, on behalf of the Secretary General, on behalf of the Executive Director, of AFRODAD, like to thank everyone who participated and to thank SADC PF Secretariat and all our honorables who could find time to be part of this important event, which for us at AFRODAD, as part of our efforts to galvanize African voices, on this subject of special drawing rights, and voices which should reflect on the statement that we shall be issuing as SADC PF and AFRODAD. We have had this discussion and we have had diverse views. What the special drawing rights has to offer, as well as the risk. Just like every other development tool, there are always the opportunities and always the risk. And I think what is left, or what requires our effort now, is to work on the risk and see how much this tool can deliver in terms of development opportunities for the SADC countries and for African countries at large. And this is part of a series of webinars, part of a webinar series. The other one, which will be coming up on the 19th in Zambia, another one in Kenya on the 22nd, another in Angola on the 24th, and one in Chad, because we want the Francophone African countries to be on the boat as well. We'll be having another on Chad on the 28th in collaboration with our partners. And I think this is part of the effort to situate the African continent on the map when it comes to discussions around these issues. And African countries have come of age, and we are no longer in a position where we should just be handed down, policy options. I think Africans have come of age, and exploring policy options and bringing suggestions to the table is what we as AFRODAT and African civil society are pushing for. And we thank regional bodies like SADC PF for being open and collaborative on opportunities like this. So with that said, we will be circulating the statement. We want a final statement that reflects the views of all the views that we have expressed here today. There are opportunities, but there are concerns as well. So the statement that we shall be issuing should be a reflection of this. So we seize this opportunity to thank you for coming, and we look forward to more opportunities of collaborating and of pushing Africa's agenda, development agenda forward. Thank you so much for coming to participate in this webinar, and we look forward to more opportunities. Thank you. Hello? Hello, Anna?
Hello, Theo.
Yeah, I think are we good to go already?
Yes, we have come to the end of our program, honorable members. We should have ended at 1 p.m., but I think we're doing well with time. Wish to thank all our participants, honorable members, and civil societies who joined us this morning for this important event. We thank you and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you, Edna.